The golden afternoon light streamed through Sweetside Bakery's lace curtains in Millbrook. Madison Pierce sat frozen in her wheelchair. 22 candles flickered on a pristine white cake. Alone, completely alone on her birthday. The silence stretched like a held breath until the door chimed softly. Blake Thompson entered, his carpenter's hands gentle on 6-year-old Harper's shoulders. The little girl clutched a homemade cupcake decorated with a star-shaped candle, her bright eyes scanning the empty bakery. When Harper spotted the beautiful young woman sitting by herself, something shifted in the child's expression. She tugged her father's worn flannel shirt with urgent whispers. Blake's weathered face softened as he approached the lonely figure in designer clothes and an expensive wheelchair. His voice was warm, careful not to startle her. "Can we join you? My daughter would like to wish you a happy birthday." What he didn't know was that this simple question would unravel secrets worth millions and change 3 lives forever. Madison's eyes widened, shifting between the man with kind eyes and the little girl practically vibrating with excitement. When was the last time someone had asked to join her rather than being paid to be there? Harper didn't wait for an answer, bouncing forward with her cupcake. "I'm Harper. This is for you. I made it with Daddy this morning." The child's matter-of-fact innocence pierced through Madison's carefully constructed walls. "We come here every year on this day because it's my mommy's birthday too. She's in heaven now, but Daddy says she can still see us celebrating." Blake pulled out a chair, moving with the unhurried grace of someone who had learned that the most important moments in life couldn't be rushed. "I'm Blake. That's a beautiful cake. No one should celebrate alone." Madison found herself nodding, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. The simple kindness felt foreign after years of clinical care and distant relatives who visited out of obligation. When Harper started singing Happy Birthday in her sweet, slightly off-key voice, Madison closed her eyes and made a wish for the first time in 4 years. Blake's baritone joined his daughter's soprano, creating a harmony that filled the small bakery with more warmth than Madison had felt since before the accident. Other customers glanced over with smiles, but Madison barely noticed them. Her world had narrowed to this table, these 2 strangers who had chosen to see her as more than her wheelchair. The wish she made was simple, so simple it almost hurt. She wished not to be alone anymore. As the last note faded, Harper clapped her hands together. "Make a wish, miss, but don't tell us or it won't come true." Madison Pierce had learned to measure life in the spaces between her father's phone calls. 22 years old, paralyzed from the waist down since a car accident 4 years ago, she inhabited a world of luxury that felt more like a gilded cage. Her father, Victor Pierce, was the CEO of Pierce Industries, a man who commanded boardrooms and influenced markets, but couldn't find 5 minutes for his only daughter. The accident had changed everything, not just her body, which would never again respond to her desperate wishes to stand and run, but her relationship with the only family she had left. Victor had retreated into his work with the fervor of a man, running from his own helplessness. He provided everything money could buy, round-the-clock nurses, a mansion with every possible accommodation, the finest doctors who all said the same thing. She would never walk again. What he couldn't provide was himself. Madison had grown accustomed to birthdays marked by bank transfers and brief text messages, to holidays celebrated with staff who were paid to care. Her wheelchair wasn't just a physical reality, but a symbol of the distance between her and the rest of the world. Blake Thompson carried his grief differently. A 30-year-old widower who worked with his hands as a carpenter, he had raised Harper alone for 5 years since his wife Kate died during childbirth. Where Victor Pierce fled from pain, Blake had learned to live alongside it, teaching his daughter that sadness and joy could exist in the same heart. His workshop smelled of sawdust and possibilities, Each piece of furniture he crafted a meditation on, permanence in a world where nothing truly lasted. The scent of wood shavings clung to his clothes like a signature. Harper had inherited her mother's sparkling eyes and her father's gentle heart, a combination that made her peculiarly sensitive to the loneliness in others. Perhaps it was because she had grown up with the ghost of a mother she never knew, learning early that love could transcend presence, that families could be both broken and whole simultaneously. Blake had taught her to notice the quiet ones, the people sitting alone in corners, the ones whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. "Everyone needs a friend, Lily," he would tell her. "Sometimes we need to be brave enough to offer friendship first." When Harper saw Madison sitting alone with her birthday cake, something in the child's heart recognized a kindred spirit in isolation. She had seen that same look in her father's eyes on the hardest days, when he thought she wasn't watching. The little girl's intuition, unmarred by adult hesitation, told her this beautiful lady in the wheelchair needed exactly what they could offer. Not pity, not charity, but simple human connection. Blake, following his daughter's lead as he often did in matters of the heart, saw in Madison's posture the weight of sustained loneliness. Over the following weeks, what began as a chance encounter evolved into something deeper and more profound. Madison found herself looking forward to their meetings at Millbrook Park, where Harper fed ducks and chattered endlessly about her drawings, her favorite books, and the mother she imagined through her father's stories. Blake never looked at her wheelchair with pity or discomfort. He simply saw it as part of her, like the way her dark hair caught the light, or how she bit her lower lip when concentrating on one of Harper's animated stories. Their conversations meandered through safe territories at first. Literature, Harper's antics, the weather, the changing seasons in Millbrook. Blake spoke of Kate not with the raw anguish of fresh grief, but with the warmed smoothness of a stone that had been turned over in his pocket thousands of times. He told Madison how Kate had been a kindergarten teacher who believed every child was a universe of possibility, how she had painted their tiny apartment with murals of fantastical forests where anything could happen, how she had faced her pregnancy complications with a courage that still took his breath away. Madison found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone, not even the expensive therapists her father had hired. She described the moment of the accident with clinical detachment at first, the drunk driver who had run the red light, the sensation of flying through the air, the strange peace before the pain. Then gradually she revealed the deeper wounds, waking up to her father's CEO mask firmly in place as he discussed her care with doctors as if negotiating a business deal. The slow realization that she had become a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be loved. Harper would often interrupt these heavy conversations with the perfect timing children possess, dragging Madison into her imaginative games where wheelchairs could fly and sadness was just another color to paint with. The little girl had decided that Madison was essential to her world, frequently asking, "Are you happy today, Miss Madison?" with the serious concern of a tiny therapist. During their second month of friendship, Harper began bringing her colored pencils to the park, creating elaborate drawings that always featured three figures: a tall man, a little girl, and a woman with wheels instead of legs. One afternoon at their usual coffee shop, while Harper was absorbed in coloring at a nearby table, Blake watched Madison laugh at something the child had said, and he felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't the dramatic lightning strike of new love, but rather the gentle recognition of possibility, like the first green shoot pushing through winter soil. Madison must have sensed his gaze because she turned to him, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. The coffee shop faded away, and there was only this: two people who had been broken in different ways, discovering they might fit together. Blake reached across the table, his calloused fingers barely brushing hers. "Madison, I need you to know something. Harper and I, we're not here because we feel sorry for you. We're here because you make our days better. You make us better." Madison's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, her voice catching on the words. Blake squeezed her hand gently. "Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together." It was then that Madison realized she was falling in love, not just with Blake, but with the possibility of a life beyond the gilded cage. Their relationship grew slowly, carefully, like a garden tended by people who understood that the most beautiful things required patience. They discovered joy in small moments, Harper teaching Madison to fold origami cranes with painstaking concentration, Blake adjusting restaurant chairs without being asked, so Madison's wheelchair fit perfectly, Madison reading stories to Harper with different voices for each character, while Blake watched with soft eyes. The universe of their small, healing family might have continued to expand gently, but Victor Pierce had been watching from the shadows of his corporate tower. He had hired private investigators the moment his household staff reported that Madison was spending time with inappropriate company. The reports on his desk painted a picture that filled him with cold fury. Blake Thompson, a working-class widower with modest means, spending hours with his damaged daughter. To Victor, the conclusion was obvious. This man was a predator, targeting a vulnerable heiress. The photographs showed them laughing together, Blake's hand on Madison's wheelchair, Harper climbing onto Madison's lap. To anyone else, they would have looked like a family. To Victor, they looked like a threat. 3 months after that first meeting in the bakery, Victor summoned Madison to his study one evening, a room she rarely entered with its wall of monitors displaying stock tickers and its smell of expensive leather and disappointment. "You will cease all contact with this man immediately," Victor commanded, not looking up from his laptop. The words hit Madison like physical blows. "He's using you, Madison. What else could he possibly want from someone like you?" The cruelty was breathtaking, casual in its devastation. Victor finally looked up, his eyes cold as winter. "You don't understand how the world works. You've been sheltered." Madison laughed, a bitter sound that seemed to surprise them both. "Sheltered? I've been imprisoned. There's a difference." She wheeled closer to his desk, her voice gaining strength. "Father, Blake and Harper see me. They actually see me. When did you last look at me without seeing a liability?" Victor stood to his full height, a tactic that worked in boardrooms, but only made Madison feel smaller in her chair. "Enough. If you continue seeing him, I'll take legal action. I'll claim he's taking advantage of a disabled woman. I have enough lawyers to destroy him." The threat hung in the air like poison. Madison stared at her father, seeing clearly for the first time the man who had replaced the loving parent of her childhood. "You would do that? You would destroy innocent people to maintain control over me?" Victor's expression didn't waver. "I would do anything to protect you, even from yourself." But Madison heard the truth beneath his words. He wasn't protecting her. He was protecting himself from the fear of being alone. The realization was devastating and liberating at the same time. She had a choice to make, and for the first time in 4 years, she felt strong enough to make it. The text message Madison sent to Blake 2 weeks later felt like a betrayal of everything real she'd found. "I can't see you and Harper anymore. This is my final decision. Please don't contact me." Blake stared at the message, reading it over and over, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. The text seemed so unlike Madison, so cold and final. Harper found him sitting in the dark living room hours later, still holding his phone. "Daddy, why are you sad?" she asked, climbing into his lap with the instinctive understanding that her father needed comfort. "Miss Madison can't see us anymore, sweetheart," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Harper was quiet for a long moment, processing this incomprehensible information. "Did we do something wrong?" Blake's heart broke all over again. "No, baby. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated reasons for things." But even as he said it, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The Madison he knew wouldn't just disappear without explanation. She wouldn't hurt Harper like this without a reason. The thought that someone might have forced her hand began to take root in his mind. The following weeks felt like holding his breath underwater. Blake's workshop felt oppressive, each piece of wood reminding him of stories he'd planned to share with Madison. Harper stopped singing around the house. Her usual cheerfulness dimmed like a light with a dying battery. Blake tried to maintain normalcy, but his daughter was too perceptive. She could sense his confusion and hurt, even when he tried to hide it. "Is Miss Madison sick?" Harper asked one morning over breakfast. "Maybe that's why she can't see us. Maybe she needs our help." The innocent hope in her voice was almost too much to bear. On the fourth day, when Harper asked if Madison didn't want them because they weren't rich enough, something in Blake snapped. Not in anger, but in determination. He wouldn't let Harper believe that love was conditional on bank accounts or social status. They drove to the Pierce estate, Harper clutching a get-well card she'd made with careful 6-year-old precision. The mansion loomed behind electronic gates, all glass and steel and intimidating wealth. Blake pressed the intercom button, his heart pounding. A security guard's voice crackled through the speaker. "State your business." Blake looked down at Harper's hopeful face and found his courage. "We're here to see Madison Pierce. We're friends of hers." The pause that followed felt eternal. "Miss Pierce is not receiving visitors. Please leave the premises." Blake was about to argue when he saw movement at an upstairs window. A figure in a wheelchair, barely visible through the glass. Madison was there, watching them. He lifted Harper up so she could wave, and for a moment the figure at the window raised a hand in response. Then the curtains closed, and Blake knew with heartbreaking certainty that Madison was being kept from them against her will. Inside the mansion, Madison heard Harper's precious voice calling her name. She was in her room, having refused to leave it since her father's ultimatum. The sound of the little girl calling for her was unbearable, each word a reminder of what she'd given up to protect them. She wheeled herself to the window and saw them at the gate. Blake standing with his hand on Harper's shoulder, both of them looking lost and confused. Something inside Madison didn't break, but snapped back into place like a dislocated bone finding its socket. She called for Maria, the housekeeper who had known her since childhood. Maria took one look at her face and simply opened the door without a word. "Be happy, mija," Maria whispered, understanding without explanation. The evening air was cold and rain had started to fall, but Madison didn't care. She knew where she needed to go, drawn by the same instinct that had first brought them together. The wheelchair was harder to push on the wet sidewalks, her arms aching from the effort, but she persisted. She had spent too many weeks being a prisoner in her own life. Tonight she was choosing freedom, even if it came with consequences she couldn't yet imagine. By the time she reached Sweetside Bakery, she was soaked through, her designer clothes clinging to her frame, her hair plastered to her scalp. Through the window, she could see Blake and Harper at their old table, sharing a piece of cake with none of their usual joy. They looked as miserable as she felt, and the sight gave her strength. She pushed open the door, and Harper's head snapped up at the familiar squeak of her wheelchair wheels. "Miss Madison!" the little girl cried, jumping up so fast her chair toppled over. "You came back. I knew you would." Blake stood slowly, his eyes taking in her soaked state, the determination and desperation written across her face. Without a word, he removed his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, his hands lingering for just a moment, feeling her trembling beneath his touch. "You're freezing," he said softly. "What are you doing here, Madison?" She looked up at him, rain and tears indistinguishable on her face. "I'm choosing," she said, her voice steady despite her shaking. "I'm choosing you and Harper. My father can do whatever he wants. I've already lost the use of my legs. I won't lose my heart, too." The door burst open with a violence that made them all jump. Victor Pierce stood there, rain-soaked and furious, having tracked Madison through the GPS on her phone. His expensive suit was ruined, his carefully styled hair plastered to his head, but his anger blazed undimmed. "Madison, enough of this nonsense. You're coming home now." His voice boomed through the quiet bakery, drawing stares from other customers. Blake stepped protectively in front of Madison's wheelchair, his carpenter's frame solid and unmovable. "I think Madison can make her own decisions," he said quietly. But there was steel in his voice. Victor's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Decisions? She's disabled, Mr. Thompson. She needs protection from people like you who would take advantage of her vulnerability." The words hit the small bakery like grenades. Harper, with the fearless honesty of childhood, looked up at Victor with confusion. "But you're the one making her sad," she said, her small voice cutting through the tension. "My daddy and I make her happy. Why don't you want her to be happy?" The simple question, delivered with such innocent clarity, struck Victor speechless for a moment. Blake knelt down to Harper's level, his voice gentle but firm. "Harper, sometimes grown-ups forget how to show love properly. Mr. Pierce loves Madison very much, but he's scared." He looked up at Victor, compassion replacing anger in his eyes. "Your daughter needs you, Mr. Pierce, not your money or your protection, just you." Victor looked at this working man, who had somehow understood what he, with all his education and success, had missed. The fight left him as suddenly as it had arrived, and he sat down heavily in a nearby chair, looking every one of his 60 years. "I've lost 4 years," Victor said, his voice broken. "How do I come back from that?" Madison wheeled herself over to her father, reaching for his hand with trembling fingers. Victor gripped her hand as if it were a lifeline, and for the first time since the accident, father and daughter truly looked at each other. "One day at a time, Dad," Madison said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just like I learned to live with this chair. One day at a time, together." Harper, sensing the shift in the room's energy, climbed onto Victor's lap with the confidence of a child who believed in happy endings. Victor looked at his daughter, then at Blake, then at the little girl who had shown more courage than most adults ever would. "If you'll have me," he said quietly, "I'd like to try. I'd like to learn how to be a father again. Maybe a grandfather someday." Madison squeezed his hand, tears flowing freely now. "We'd like that, Dad. We'd all like that very much." Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the small bakery, something new was beginning. Not the dramatic conclusion of a fairy tale, but the quiet beginning of a real family, built on choice rather than obligation. 2 years later, Sweetside Bakery was transformed with white ribbons and fresh flowers for an afternoon that would blend celebration with commitment. The guest list was small but meaningful. Maria the housekeeper, a few close friends, and Victor, who stood ready to walk beside his daughter down the aisle. The aisle itself was wide enough for Madison's wheelchair, which Harper had decorated with flowers and ribbons until it looked like something from an enchanted garden. Madison wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to flow gracefully around her chair, and when she smiled at Blake waiting at the makeshift altar, she was radiant with a joy that seemed to light the room from within. Victor had changed dramatically over the past 2 years, learning to find satisfaction in moments that had nothing to do with stock portfolios or market strategies. He spent evenings in Blake's workshop now, learning to work with his hands for the first time in his life, discovering the meditation of creating something beautiful from raw materials. When he walked beside Madison's wheelchair, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, His eyes were wet with tears he didn't try to hide. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he whispered. "Your mother would be so proud." Madison squeezed his hand, her heart full of gratitude for second chances. Blake's vows brought tears to everyone present. "Madison, you are the person whose broken pieces fit with mine to create something whole. I promise to push your chair when you're tired, to carry you when needed, but most importantly, to always see you, not your disability, but the incredible woman who saved Harper and me from a life half lived." Madison's response was equally moving. "Blake, you and Harper didn't just accept my limitations. You showed me they don't define my possibilities. You've given me a family, a future, and a love I thought only existed in fairy tales." Harper, serving as the world's most enthusiastic flower girl, had insisted on adding her own words to the ceremony. Standing between her father and new stepmother, she declared with 6-year-old solemnity, "We're choosing to be a family forever and ever, even when things get hard." Her innocent wisdom brought laughter and tears in equal measure. Victor surprised everyone by taking the microphone, speaking publicly for the first time about something other than business. "I spent most of my life thinking success meant never showing weakness, never needing anyone. My daughter and her new family have taught me that real strength comes from vulnerability, real success from connection." As the sun set over Millbrook, the small wedding party gathered around a table laden with cake and quiet celebration. Harper bounced between the adults, her joy infectious, her laughter the soundtrack to their new beginning. Blake cut the cake with the same careful precision he brought to his woodworking, serving Madison first with a smile that spoke of promises kept and futures built together. "Remember when you sat alone with your birthday cake?" he asked, his voice soft with memory. Madison nodded, her eyes bright. "I made a wish that day." "Did it come true?" Harper asked, appearing at Madison's elbow with chocolate frosting on her nose. Madison looked around at her unconventional family, gathered in the same bakery where it all began, and felt a peace she had never thought possible. "It came true," she said, pulling Harper into her lap. "But it was better than anything I could have imagined." Victor joined them, bringing a piece of wedding cake, his movements slower now but filled with intentional love. "No one should eat cake alone," he said, echoing Blake's first words to Madison. She laughed, pulling him down for a kiss. "I'll never be alone again, will I?" Blake shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "Never. You've got me, Harper, your father." He placed his hand gently on her stomach. "And whoever this little one turns out to be." Madison's eyes widened in surprise and joy. She had planned to tell him tomorrow, but somehow he knew. "How did you guess?" Blake grinned, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Harper told me you've been feeling sick in the mornings. She's worried you might have the flu." The little girl nodded seriously from Madison's lap. "But Daddy says sometimes when ladies feel sick, it means there's a baby coming. Is there a baby in your tummy, Madison?" The simple question, asked with such hope, brought fresh tears to Madison's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, there's going to be a baby." Harper's squeal of delight could probably be heard 3 blocks away. 6 months later, the hospital room was full of family as Madison held her newborn son. They had named him Samuel Victor, after the grandfather who had learned to love again. Victor held his grandson with trembling hands, while Harper explained to baby Samuel all the important things about being part of their family. "You have to know," she said seriously to the infant, "that we're a special family. We chose each other. That's the best kind of family there is." Blake stood beside Madison's hospital bed, their fingers intertwined, watching their blended family with wonder. The journey from that afternoon in the bakery to this moment had taught them that love wasn't a destination, but a journey taken hand in hand. Madison looked around the room at her father, cooing over his grandson, at Harper making the baby laugh with silly faces, at Blake's eyes full of love and gratitude, and she thought about that wish she had made on her 22nd birthday. She had wished not to be alone. The universe had answered by giving her something better than she had dared to hope for, a family that chose each other every day, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. As Harper began singing a lullaby to her baby brother, Madison closed her eyes and made a new wish. This time, she wished for nothing at all. She had everything she needed right here in this room, in this moment, in this life she had built from courage and choice. The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital windows, casting the same golden light that had illuminated that first meeting in Sweetside Bakery. Madison smiled, remembering the scared, lonely woman who had sat with 22 candles and no hope. That woman could never have imagined this. A husband who saw her as whole, a daughter who loved her fiercely, a father who had found his way back, and a son who would grow up knowing that families come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest question. Sometimes all it takes is someone brave enough to ask, "Can we join you?" And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the answer changes everything.